on the final day of the legislative session. It is about 3:15. I want to also note that this is coming immediately after a lengthy overnight debate. In fact, I took part in a multi-hour debate that finished just this morning about 8 a.m. And there was an effort by the majority to try and roll us right into this debate immediately after. And our leadership was effectively forced to make an agreement to limit debate on this particular bill just to allow us the opportunity to go home and get cleaned up after being here overnight debating bills. And I think it's a travesty the way this process is working. I noticed that there's still a bunch of stuff in the center of the Senate chamber right now, which I'm sure people on CTN can see, a bunch of chairs stacked up. You'd think that our state government, our state legislature would be operated in a way that was with a little bit more respect and a little more decorum than the way it has been. I couldn't be more frustrated by the past couple of days and the way this place has operated. I have always operated in good faith with my colleagues. I try and debate the issues one by one on the subject matter at hand. I do not try and drag in outside of issues. You just heard the good chairwoman who I do respect and work very well with, but she felt the need to interject federal politics and Trump and this and that, and I hear it constantly. What's going on, across this country? There is a narrative that's being generated to pull the wool over the eyes of the people across this country, and particularly in the state of Connecticut, by the majority party, that somehow national politics has something to do with what's happening in this room, and it doesn't. The bill that is before us is the culmination of years of effort on behalf of the majority to get to mail-in voting in the state of Connecticut. Back in 2014, they tried to pass mail-in voting, which requires a constitutional amendment, and they asked a question: shall the Constitution of the state be amended to remove restrictions concerning absentee ballots and permit a person to vote without appearing at a polling place on the day of an election? And you know what happened? It failed. And it failed because those two words were in the question, without appearing. Fast forward to a couple of years ago when that question was put forth in front of the voters again, but it was modified on purpose. The new question: shall the Constitution of the state be amended to permit the General Assembly to allow each voter to vote by absentee ballot, which I will point out is the law. It was already at the law at the time that the question was asked. So based on that, of course people voted in favor of it. I'd also point out it wasn't an overwhelming victory. I think people consider our voting process in the state of Connecticut somewhat suspect. They've seen the news. They've seen Wanda from Bridgeport. They know about the ballot stuffing in the drop boxes. This particular bill that is in front of us is 73 sections long. It's 116 pages. The only thing that has anything to do with the ballot question is Section 1. If Section 1 was here by itself, I might even find my way to supporting it. But no, a lot of other things are inserted into this bill. There's a lot of negative things inserted into this bill. In fairness, there are some good positive things inserted into this bill. I commend my colleague who mentioned a moment ago about risk-limiting audits. That's something we worked together on. I'm delighted that that's in there. But there are plenty of other things that should not be in there. And because I am limited to only 2 hours worth of debate time today on a bill that ought to take a week, a year to debate, I'm going to have to move fast. And I'm going to just try and go through amendments to make as many points and changes to this policy as I can. I want people watching to pay very close attention to each policy point and each vote. And I want you to watch who's voting for what. Who actually cares? The debate is trying to be directed by the majority to be about voter access and voter suppression, as if Republicans are trying to suppress the vote. I'm here to tell you I want every lawful, eligible voter to vote, and I want it as easy as possible for them. The difference is I don't want people that are not eligible to vote to be able to vote. I don't want people voting twice. I don't want people voting illegally. I don't want people voting in multiple places. I don't want illegal aliens voting if they're not eligible. I don't want any of that. I want our elections to count. I want them to be accurate. I want them to be reliable. I want the people across the state of Connecticut to look at our election and say, I trust the results, just like I did growing up in this state. I got to tell you, in the last few years, I don't always trust the results. Now, some people will go out there and say, oh, you're an election denier. I'm not saying that there's tens of thousands of faulty or erroneous or fraudulent votes. I'm just saying that there's definitely some. I don't know how many that is, but there are elections decided by one vote in the state. There's a state representative serving that won an election just a couple of cycles ago by one vote. And that was an election that was decided with a great many mail-in ballots, which is certainly ripe for concern. My point today is if the voters knew when they voted on that constitutional amendment at the ballot box that they would be enabling this bill, if this bill was the question, I sincerely doubt that there would have been a majority in support of this. Let's just talk about some of the sections. I'm going to start with section 57. This is a section of the bill that restricts federal agents from coming within 250 feet of the polls. Why, you might ask? Because they're trying to, the majority, to create a narrative that somehow there's going to be intimidation at the polls, and there are going to be federal ICE agents there wearing masks and scaring people away and preventing them from voting, and they're going to round up anyone that is brown or black, and they're going to go ahead and lock them up. This has never happened in the state of Connecticut. To my knowledge, it hasn't happened anywhere. I certainly wouldn't support any kind of abuse from our federal government. I'm a civil libertarian. I would want to stand up and protect the individual rights of every person in our state of Connecticut if our government was out of control like that. I don't think that's a true narrative. That's a false narrative. And what they're doing is they're trying to distract from what's actually happening, which is a massive loosening of our election restrictions so that there are the ability for shenanigans to occur. In fact, I'm going to refer to this as the shenanigans bill throughout because there's lots of shenanigans associated with it. So this bill would restrict ICE agents or actually any federal or state police from being within 250 feet of a polling location during an election. We could go on for a day about all of the intricacies of this policy and whether it applies to them when they're on duty, off duty, whether they're actually in pursuit of an investigation, whether there's something going or they just happen to be in the store next door that's within 250 feet of the polling place, but it's not worth it. The point is that it's being inserted into this bill for political purposes and it ought to be removed. So through you, Madam President, I have an amendment. It is LCO 6030. I ask that the clerk please call this amendment and I be given leave of the chamber to summarize.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
LCO 6030, we designate Senate Amendment Schedule A.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much. Madam President, this is a very straightforward amendment. It would strike Section 57 from the bill. And it would strike Section 57 for the bill because it is a wholly political section designed to inject divisive federal political narratives into our state election system. It would restrict legitimate law enforcement personnel from being near the polls, where they might actually be there to protect someone, all based on this narrative that somehow ICE agents are somehow the Gestapo. It also would empower a moderator to restrict someone from being able to vote because they're wearing a mask. And I've asked these questions before. If that person was wearing a medical mask because they were sick or they didn't want to get someone else sick, that the moderator could actually restrict them from voting. They could say, you are not eligible to vote because you're wearing a mask. I find that offensive. If the person pushed that issue, and presumably the moderator would call the police, and then the police would come there, and then it would be up to the police to decide whether the person could vote. I am sorry, but setting up a set of circumstances like this to create this type of conflict at the polls is actually the exact problem that they claim they're trying to stop. We don't have a problem now. I think moderators use good judgment when they're trying to verify the identity of people, but they only have the tools that they have. And we will talk more and more about the tools that they have and how they need more in a moment. I move adoption of this amendment. This political section of the bill should be removed, and I'd ask for a roll call vote.
Thank you. Senator Flexer, will you remark upon the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I would encourage my colleagues to reject this amendment. As you'll hear here today, perhaps most vociferously on this these particular sections, there are many people in the state of Connecticut, Madam President, who are concerned for their safety and security in a wide variety of settings, unfortunately, in this day and age in our country. There are people who are concerned that when they're taking their children to school, their safety may be in jeopardy. There are people who are concerned when entering a church that their safety may be in jeopardy. And so, Madam President, we'll just have a very respectful, I hope, disagreement on this, but there are a number of people in our state who are concerned with being able to exercise the normal course of their lives that due to overreach, what I would describe as overreach by the federal government, and a federal government that is intent, in my opinion, on intimidating some members of our community, that showing up to vote is another point that has become a point where people are concerned for their safety. So, Madam President, I would strongly urge my colleagues to reject this amendment. I think if you talk to people in our state, the people who have their children detained with no warning, have had their mothers detained with no warning, I think you might have a different perspective on these sections. And I think it's important that we do everything we can in the state of Connecticut to make sure that the actions of the federal government don't have an effect on people turning out to exercise their most basic and most important constitutional right, which is voting in our elections. Thank you, Madam President.
Will you remark further on the amendment? Will you remark further on the amendment? A roll call vote has been requested. The machine is open, Mr. Clerk.
An immediate roll call has been ordered in the Senate. An immediate roll call has been ordered in the Senate. We vote on Senate Amendment A. Immediate roll call has been ordered in the Senate.
senators voted. The machine is locked. Mr. Clerk, the tally, please.
Total number voting 36. Those voting yea 11. Those voting nay 25. Those absent 0.
Amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. That was the first in a series of amendments that I will be offering today, and I just want to note for the record that it did indeed fail on a party line vote. Every amendment that I am offering, I would argue, is good policy that should go with the bill that is before us. You know, part of the problem with this bill is not necessarily what's in it, although that is indeed a problem. The last amendment is a good illustration of that. But the bigger problem is what's not in it. You know, other states that have significant amounts of absentee or mail-in voting, they adjust that. They change their policies. They structure their laws on purpose to make sure that those types of elections are still fair and still honest. Not here in Connecticut. All of the tools that are used by other states to make sure that they keep their elections secure, utterly ignored in this bill. Year after year after year after amendment after bill proposal, you name it, I'm trying all the time to get these things incorporated into our laws. All I get from the majority is, you're just trying to suppress the vote. You're trying to keep people from trying to vote. That is a lousy, garbage narrative, and the people of Connecticut are smarter than that. They know it. And this next amendment is designed to illustrate that. Several of the things that are in this bill: automatic sending of absentee ballot applications. You signed up once, and those things end up getting mailed to you forever into perpetuity. And when I say you, I don't really mean you. I mean whoever lives at your address. We're going to talk more about that one in a few minutes. People want the voter rolls audited periodically. How about every year we audit the voter rolls to remove people that actually have passed on or moved away? No, not in the bill. How about voter ID? How about a signature verification process or some type of identity process that they use in other states to track people who vote by mail? Nope, we don't have that either. We got the makings of it in this bill, but it is nothing more than the establishment of a number on the paperwork, but nothing tracks anyone or anything to make sure that the person's only voting once and that they're an eligible voter. That's the difference. So through you, Madam President, I'd like to offer another amendment. This one is LCO 6005. I ask that the clerk please call this amendment, and I be given leave of the chamber to summarize it.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
LCO 6005 will be designated Senate Amendment Schedule B.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This is an extremely straightforward amendment. When the moment I start to describe it, people are going to know what it's about, and they're going to know that overwhelmingly across this state of Connecticut and this nation, people are in favor of this policy, and yet the majority refuses repeatedly, over and over again, to take up a bill on the subject, to have a public hearing on the subject, to allow votes on the subject, to vote in favor, either in committee or in this chamber or the House of Representatives, where I have personally offered this amendment many, many times before, and I'm going to do it again right now. And that is photo identification for voting. Overwhelmingly, people across this country know that you really should have photo ID for voting. And I know that a lot of people that might be watching this say, well, they do ask for my photo ID when I go to vote in my town. In some places they do. They try and they do a very good job, including the towns that I serve. But the fact of the matter is there's no requirement in the law for that. You have to provide some sort of identification. But it could be an envelope that has your address on it. That's not identification in any world that anyone is familiar with. You need a photo ID to cash a check, to get on a plane, to get prescription drugs, to buy liquor. I could write a book about all the things you need photo ID to have access in our society. The one thing that's not required in Connecticut is voting. You can vote without any verifiable proof about who you are in the state, and that should change. This amendment simply requires a photo ID requirement for both in-person and absentee voting. It's a really good idea. And before my colleague gets up and says why this is a bad amendment, I'm going to tell you what she's going to say. She's going to say, first off, that this is somehow going to suppress the vote for certain people because they don't have the ability to get a photo ID. But we factored that into this amendment. This amendment says that if you are poor and you can't afford one, the state will provide that photo ID to you for free. If you need to have a photograph of your identification to vote by absentee, we will set it up for you that you can go to any library or anything like that to get it. And then they'll bring up the fact that there's a random person that is disabled, they can't leave their home and so forth. But it's a ridiculous argument. These folks never leave their home. How do they get their groceries? How do they function in the world? They don't have any family, they don't have any friends, there's no social work, there's no nothing. It is a ridiculous argument. It's a ridiculous argument on its face, and everyone knows it. So pay close attention to this vote. This is a simple vote. Should we actually put the one most popular provision to secure elections into our laws in Connecticut or not? I say yes. I move adoption of the amendment, and I'd ask for a roll call vote.
And the question is on adoption. We will have a roll call vote. Senator Flexer.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I stand and urge my colleagues to reject this amendment here today. While the good ranking member was correct in anticipating that I would stand up and ask my colleagues to reject the amendment, he was somewhat inaccurate in what he predicted I would say. Madam President, we have heard many times in our committee by the former vice chair of this committee, who is now our Secretary of the State, of experiences in her own family of people who don't have access to photo identification, Madam President. Madam President, a member of my own family who presented herself to vote in a community where she had been voting for multiple decades, but does not have a photo ID. She was born in another country. Getting access to her birth records are not easy. Those records are not easily obtainable. And about a decade ago, even though it was in a relatively small town, was turned away from voting for not having a photo ID. Madam President. Madam President, I do think this amendment should be rejected. There are people who will be disenfranchised. The good ranking member has heard these comments before from our former vice chair, now Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas. These comments, again, from me, the reality of the experience of our family members doesn't seem to be particularly persuasive, but I hope it will be persuasive to the other members of the Senate and that we will reject this amendment. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark further on the amendment? Will you remark further on the amendment? If not, the machine is open. Mr. Clerk.
Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. Voting on Senate Amendment B, House Bill number 5001. Voting on the amendment to the bill. This is House Bill number 5001, Senate Amendment B. We're voting on Senate Amendment B. This is not the bill. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate on Senate Amendment B, House Bill number 5001.
the senators voted? Have all the senators voted? The machine is locked, Mr. Clerk.
House Bill 5001. This is Senate Amendment B. Total number voting 36, total voting yea 11, total voting nay 25, absent not voting 0.
Amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Again, not surprised, but there you have it. Another party line vote. I don't know how many that is, just since I've been in the legislature, where the minority Republicans have attempted to put photo identification requirements into our voting laws, rejected on party lines by the majority yet again. Are they listening to the people of Connecticut who overwhelmingly support photo ID? Are they listening to the people who want secure elections? Excuse me, Madam President, can we? Thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate the courtesy. I want to just expand on what's going on. The last couple of amendments that we've had are all about providing the necessary security to make sure we have legitimate elections in the state of Connecticut. And the majority continues to pass policy after policy after policy to undermine those security protocols and concerns that other states, even blue states, adopt. When this bill, House Bill 5001, clearly a priority bill, passed through the House of Representatives, it took all day and into the night, which is the debate that it actually deserves. Through you, Madam President, can I ask that there be no phone calls going on within feet of me while I'm trying to debate a bill in the Senate? The decorum in here is just out of control. Is there any respect anymore?
Senator Sampson, we will ask all of our guests and staff to please direct their attention to you and to Senator Flexer as we debate this bill, because we do want to be respectful. So, sir, please continue.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate that. This job is hard enough. I've been up for basically 36 straight hours debating bills here on behalf of my constituents, and it's an honor and a privilege to do it. And I want to do a good job. If anything, that's the concern I have, as I don't want anything to take away from my ability to do the best I can for my constituents. So I started to say that photo ID is a component, just one of the components that is being ignored by the majority that helps to undermine the security of our elections. And I mentioned that this bill is a priority bill, 5001. That's like the House priority bill for the majority. This bill went all day and into the night when it was debated in the House of Representatives, and it's a lot of the same provisions and a lot of the same concerns I'm mentioning right now. But one of the things that was a real bone of contention in the House was Section 9 of the bill, which is no longer there. There's a Section 9 now, but I presume it was the old Section 10. Section 9 of the bill was a provision that would allow any voter to request to be on an automatic system to receive absentee ballots. And once you're on that system, you would get your absentee ballot application forever. Or the person that lives at your address would get that absentee ballot application forever. If you're familiar with what has gone on in the state of Connecticut with regard to absentee ballot fraud, particularly in Bridgeport, this is a gift to the criminals that want to undermine our elections. You're even saving them stamps now. They can just sign up and send those ballot applications every year. The guy that is in charge of the mail room at the apartment building, he'll be able to pull all those ballot applications out, fill them out, and send them back in. We've heard these stories. We've heard these stories from our Democratic colleagues. We had a former Democratic senator who said on this floor that he experienced a situation where people were voting from an empty lot. Our esteemed Senate president said on the floor during debate several years ago that you just don't know who's filling out an absentee ballot. All of these things are true. The fact of the matter is we want to make voting easy. We want to provide access. I don't have an objection to absentee ballot voting, but it has to be done properly. It It has to be done with some notion that we care who's actually voting, and we're not diminishing the value of your vote or my vote because there's people that shouldn't be voting in the election. Or they're double voting or God knows what. And there are organizations in the state that are constantly putting out data listing the number of dead people on our voter rolls, the people that have moved on, the double voting that's going on. These things are real. Are they rampant? Is it out of control? Am I an election denier? No. But we should be making some kind of effort. When I bring these things up in the committee or to the Secretary of State, I'm like, well, there's always going to be some level of cheating. That is not a good enough answer. That is not a good enough answer. If we have policies, and frankly, these are easy things. Let's just copy other states that do this because they bothered to care. Photo ID for one. But in the House, they debated this section about the automatic ballot applications ad nauseum until ultimately it shut down the place and a deal had to be struck. And that section was removed from the bill. A victory for the Republicans down in the House. Good job. But you know what's happened since? Of course, this bill doesn't have that section in it anymore, but they took that same section and they put it in Senate Bill 1 that was already passed out of here. So they're still going to do it. And then they came forward with another bill that actually took it out of Senate Bill 1 and put it in a different bill. A giant secondary budget implementer from my perspective. That's Senate Bill 477, Section 37. And basically what it does, it says that any elector may submit a request and receive an application for an absentee ballot for election or referendum, and those will be issued by the municipal clerk. Period. Not only that, they come pre-filled. Are you kidding me? How easy are we going to make it for people to cheat? How easy are we going to make it for people that want a ballot harvest, who want to stuff drop boxes? How easy do you want to make it for them? That's what's going on here. And no, it's not in this bill, but it's still relevant to this bill. And because of that, Madam President, I have an amendment. It is LCO 6203. I ask that the clerk please call this amendment and I be given leave of the chamber to summarize it.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 6203, Senate Amendment C.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Very straightforward amendment. This would remove, well, it would add a section. I just want to be accurate about what the amendment does. It would add a section at the end of this bill, Section 501, that would make very clear that we are going to remove Section 37, I believe, and 38. Nope, just Section 37 from Senate Bill 477, which is the offensive section that I just spoke about. This is terrible policy, folks. It should not be allowed to be enacted. We have got to do something to stop it. Even if we pass this amendment, I'm sure which order the governor would ultimately sign all these things in. So we should keep an eye. We should keep an eye on who thinks it's a good idea to give a gift to the Wandas of the world to set up more ballot fraud and more ballot harvesting and more drop box stuffing. Because that's what this little bit of language does. A vote for my amendment gets rid of it. A vote against my amendment means you think that's perfectly okay in Connecticut. Watch how we vote. Madam President, I'd like a roll call vote.
Hold on.
We will have a roll call vote after Senator Flexer remarks on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to encourage my colleagues to reject this amendment and make a few comments on the amendment before us. Madam President, as was noted by the good ranking member, there was a lot of debate in the House of Representatives. I think the compromise that they reached on this issue is an attempt to recognize that right now under our existing law, there are people who meet the definition under existing law for having access to an absentee ballot, people who have a permanent disability or illness that limits their ability to get to a polling place. Right now, they can have access to an absentee ballot by being on a permanent list. So this provision is trying to take that and carry it forward for those voters who have relied on those provisions for many years, voters who under existing law are eligible to vote by absentee ballot. The provision that will ultimately become law if this Senate does what I predict it will do over the next 10 hours, will allow voters to be on a list to get an application for an absentee ballot. So not to get a ballot, but to get an application for an absentee ballot. And I think that strikes the right compromise for respecting the voters who already get their ability to vote through being on that list where they have access to the absentee ballots, and not disenfranchising them by making a sudden change in the law that they might not know is happening. Madam President, I do think that the way this has been negotiated carefully does represent a compromise in making it clear that this is just about getting an application and not getting an actual ballot. And Madam President, I'm sorry, I would have to also just respectfully disagree with the good ranking member on a few statements that he made. And I'll let Senator Looney speak for himself perhaps when this debate is over as to his opinion about absentee ballots. But I have heard repeatedly the comments and the quotes of a former state senator in this chamber, a state senator that frankly was probably the person I've served with that I respect the least, a state senator who was convicted of federal crimes with regard to his election in 2018. So to hear arguments he made on the Senate floor as being a reason to vote for this amendment is frankly offensive to me, given the actions that person took and the federal crimes he's convicted of, multiple offenses, and is now, I believe, awaiting sentencing for. That is not an opinion that this chamber should respect, and I hope that this chamber will reject this amendment. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark further, Senator Sampson?
Thank you very much, Madam President. I apologize for interjecting one time, but if we're going to get into a little debate, we're going to get into a little debate. I just want to cover a few things. First and foremost, with regard to this amendment, I appreciate the good chairwoman trying to describe that this is just a ballot application and so forth versus an actual ballot, but it's one step away. The ballot application gets sent, it's already pre-filled, anyone can scribble anything on it because we've not done anything to actually have signature verification. They don't have to attach a photocopy of their license or anything to it. So, I mean, again, all of the security things that you would want to include are not included. And the big difference, which she can argue with me if she likes, but the big difference is that when we allow people to go on the automatic absentee ballot list now, it is because they have a disability or some other reason that makes them eligible. This is any voter, any perfectly able-bodied person, they can get on the voter rolls forever to get an absentee ballot in perpetuity, and that will be sent to that address forever. How many apartment buildings in Bridgeport will they go to? As far as the colleague that we refer to, Senator Bradley, and Senator Bradley represented the city of Bridgeport. I'm sure he is very, very attuned to understand what is actually going on with elections in Bridgeport. And yeah, maybe he's got less than a stellar reputation at this point, but I don't doubt the veracity of what he said on this floor when it came to how people cheat in elections in Bridgeport. Pretty sure he was telling the truth about that. And finally, as far as the president of the Senate, he said, now we all, this is on May 8th, 2019, right here in this chamber, now we all, one of the reasons why I think that this proposed constitutional amendment should be broadly acceptable, and this is about early voting, and I would hope that it would get the kind of vote that it receives in the House of Representatives where it passed with 125 votes, 11 more than 75% threshold needed, is that a provision that many regard as problematic was removed before the House took up the issue. That is the opening process potentially to the universalization of absentee balloting. Speaking in opposition to what's happening right now. And I think that is legitimately controversial because in reality, we never really know for sure who is casting an absentee ballot. We hope it's the person to whom it was sent. We believe in most cases it is, but we don't actually know. And that is an issue. If we open up absentee balloting for the convenience for those who are ill or disabled or out of state on a given day, but obviously the number of absentee ballot cases of fraud that we've had over the years well documents the flaws in that system. And he goes on. So this is the President of the Senate's view back in 2019, that you never really know who is casting an absentee ballot. I urge adoption of this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Flexer.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I would respectfully request that perhaps this debate, we allow senators who are still serving in this circle to speak for themselves. And again, I just want to strongly reject the notion that anyone in this circle should take seriously the opinion of a convicted federal felon whose felonies were related to election crimes. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark further on the amendment? Will you remark further? If not, the machine is open. Mr. Clerk.
Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on Senate Amendment C. This is not the bill. We're voting on Senate Amendment C of House Bill number 5001. We're voting on the amendment. This is not the bill. This is Senate Amendment C of House Bill 5001, an act concerning absentee voting for all and various other reforms related to the administration of elections, as amended by House Amendment Schedule A. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate on Senate Amendment C of House Bill number 5001.
all the senators voted? The machine will be locked. Mr. Clerk, call the tally.
Senate Amendment C of House Bill 5001. Total number voting 36, total voting yea 11, total voting nay 25, absent not voting 0.
You have to actually touch the lock button. Oh, I get to touch the lock button.
Okay. And then you can say the amendment fails.
The amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. As you just heard, the amendment fails. Another 25 to 11 vote, a party line. The Democratic supermajority in the state of Connecticut once again rejecting another common sense policy to improve the veracity of our election process, to make sure that our elections are fair, that they are secure, that voters across Connecticut can have confidence that when they cast their vote, that it counts, and that it's not being canceled out by a fraudulent vote by a ballot stuffer in Bridgeport or anywhere else. That was the idea behind that amendment, and that is the idea behind the next amendment as well. I started by saying that the problem with this bill is only partly some of the items that are contained in it beyond the expansion of absentee voting, but also the things that are not in it, like the recent amendments that I've offered. And this is another thing that is not in the bill. I want to acknowledge the fact that I do appreciate that throughout this document in sections 2 and I think in section 9, there are some mentions of the creation of a unique ballot identifier, which is a code that would allow the town hall to basically match a ballot envelope and a ballot. These things ultimately get married together with this identification number, which allows the voter to remain anonymous. That's a good thing. But that is not enough, because what is missing is a mechanism to verify that it was a legitimate voter and tie that voter to that number and to that ballot so that each voter who is eligible, and only voters who are eligible are allowed to vote, and they only get to vote once. So through you, Madam President, I have an amendment. The clerk is in possession of LCO 6012. I ask that the clerk please call this amendment, and I be given leave of the chamber to summarize it.
The question is on adoption. Will you remark?
Mr. Clerk.
Oh, Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 6012, Senate Amendment D.
The question is on adoption. Will you remark?
Thank you very much. Madam President, yes, I will gladly remark. This is a very straightforward amendment. It would add a section at the end of the bill, simply adding new language to develop and implement a process by which a unique voting identification number is created for each elector. I have, for the last several years, been offering amendments about signature verification. But I've learned that over time, other states that used to use this process by which they would capture a voter's signature at the time they registered to vote and then use that as a mechanism to compare it against the ballot when an absentee ballot is submitted to determine whether or not it was the actual voter who cast it. That system's been improved dramatically. So no longer do they verify signatures, they create unique identification numbers that protect the anonymity of voters but still allow us to track who's actually voting, to make sure we know that people who are eligible get to vote, and only people who are eligible get to vote, and they only get to vote once. It's a beautiful thing, folks. That's what we want in elections. We want to make sure that everyone who's eligible has the easiest possible access, but only those folks. This amendment creates and implements a process to start that in Connecticut, to create this voter identifier that will be used, much like signature verification, to be able to keep that process cohesive. It will protect the voter's anonymity, but also make sure that only eligible voters are able to vote and have their vote counted. This is an important thing. It's not in the bill, but it is a step towards what should be done. It is what is being done in other states, red and blue states, that care about the veracity of their election process. I move adoption, and I'd like a roll call vote.
Thank you. We will have a roll call vote. Senator Flexer, will you remark on the amendment?
Yes, thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I would encourage my colleagues to reject this amendment, largely because of the section in the amendment that would cause voters' ballots to be rejected if this amendment were adopted, Madam President. Madam President, I think in the underlying bill, we've tried to strike a careful balance between making sure that absentee ballots that are submitted are thoroughly checked and vetted for veracity and that they're associated with the appropriate voter, also giving voters an opportunity to cure any issues that may come up with their ballots, if signatures missing, that sort of thing. But at the same time, trying to strike a balance and protecting the privacy of the voter and making it so that what is actually on that ballot isn't readily connected to the name. And so largely because this amendment would cause ballots to be rejected and perhaps voters not be given any additional opportunity to correct that rejection and in fact cast their ballot, I would encourage my colleagues to reject this amendment as well. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I appreciate the good chairwoman of the Government Administration Election Committee's concern over ballots being rejected, except that I would like to point out that when you expand voting to mail-in voting and more absentee ballot voting, you get more rejected ballots. It's another reason why it is always better to encourage in-person voting. I'm all for early voting because it actually happens in person. When you do mail-in voting, people end up getting disenfranchised. I've been saying this for years. The fact of the matter is that in 2020, when the state of Connecticut sent out ballot applications to everybody in the state who was on the voter rolls, which means that some people I know ended up getting 10 ballot applications for people that lived in their house before them or never lived there, or the dog or the neighbor or somebody who's passed on. All of that goes out. And the other bad thing that happens is many people filled out their absentee ballot application, then they got their ballot and they filled it out, and they filled it out wrong. Like they put both their husband and wife's ballots in the same envelope. When that gets to the town hall, guess what happens? It gets thrown away because it's just improper. But people don't know any better, and it happens in inordinate numbers. So their votes are never counted, and they don't even know it. You know what else happened in 2020? A great many ballots were received after the election. Guess what? More disenfranchised voters. So I really appreciate the good chairman getting up to explain that we're concerned about ballots being rejected, but under my amendment, the only ballots that are rejected are people that are not eligible to vote. I think that's a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Will you remark further on the amendment? If not, the machine is open, Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 6012. Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate on Senate Amendment D. Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate on Senate Amendment D of House Bill number 5001. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on the amendment. This is Senate Amendment D. We're not voting on the bill. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate.
Have all the senators voted? The machine is locked. Mr. Clerk, would you give us the tally, please, sir?
Total number voting 36. Those voting yea, 10. Those voting yea, 26. Those absent, 0.
Thank you. Amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Again, another attempt to improve the bill that is before us, to actually add some protocols and protections to protect the veracity of elections, and yet shut down party lines one by one. It's as if it doesn't matter whether the ideas are good or bad. They're Republican ideas. They must be rejected. And that's just too bad. Because I know I represent a great many people back home. And I know that they think that many of these are very good ideas, particularly when it comes to photo ID, when it comes to preventing ballot fraud like we saw in Bridgeport. I know the people back home want to see those things happen. It's very unfortunate that those amendments are not given the credit that they are due, and they are summarily rejected out of hand. And we don't even see most of the members in the room anymore. We have new rules that allow people to vote remotely from their office. Who knows if they're even paying any attention or even know what they're voting on? It's a shame. I'm going to offer another amendment in a moment that is yet another item that belongs in the bill that's not there. I listed from the outset certain things that should be here that are basically required if you want to have a legitimate mail-in voting program in your state. And one of those things is to have accurate voter rolls. The voter rolls are the record of who is an eligible voter in the state of Connecticut. Those voter rolls should be maintained in a way that respects the value of those folks who have the eligibility to vote in our great state and our great country. And they should also be protected against people who do not belong on the voter rolls and should be removed. People who have passed on, people who have moved out of state, people who are not eligible to vote because of their immigration status, and so on. Those people do not belong on the voter rolls. And yet, there is zero requirement for our Secretary of State's office in Connecticut to clean our voter rolls. It's in the statute, but only as a suggestion. There's a big fat may, M-A-Y, versus a shall. And that's really what needs to be changed more than anything else. So, with that, Madam President, I have an amendment. It's LCO 6004. I ask that the clerk please call this amendment, and I be given the leave of the chamber to summarize.
Mr. Clerk.
6004.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 6004, Senate Amendment E.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. It's a very straightforward amendment. This would place a requirement in our statutes to go very, very closely and properly with the bill before us, expanding absentee voting in the state. If we're going to be allowing people to vote remotely, and we're going to be sending out ballot applications and ballots to them, shouldn't we know whether they're truly eligible voters? Shouldn't we know that? And I want to point out that one of the problems with this whole system is that in our state, anybody can send out a ballot application to anybody. So what we've witnessed is in recent years, political campaigns engaging in sending out ballot applications to loads of different people. So you're getting one from the Democrat candidate, you're getting one from the Republican candidate, the Green candidate, the Independent candidate. So you're overwhelmed with these things. People are confused about them. They don't know whether they actually can go vote in person again. I've heard the most crazy questions because people are not being properly informed on what should be happening. And as a result, I believe that the best solution is A, prohibit the practice of allowing all of these outside folks to be sending out absentee ballot applications willy-nilly. But number one if they're going to do it, we got to make sure they're only sending them to legitimate voters. So this amendment adds after the bill another section 501 that would require the Secretary of State to annually cause a search of the computerized voter registration records to identify electors and verify that they are legitimate voters. Everybody knows this is a problem. If you were alive in 2020, you know this is a problem. When the state sent out absentee ballot applications to every registered voter on the voter rolls in the state, they spent millions of taxpayer dollars mailing those ballot applications. For one thing, what a complete waste. But not only in the process of doing that, we discovered that so many tens of thousands of them were returned in the mail. Proof that all of these people were on the voter rolls that shouldn't have been there. And I know some work has been done. I don't want to act like nothing's been done. They've done some work to clean it up and take care of some of those. But the fact of the matter is that if you listen to some of the voter integrity advocates that exist in the state of Connecticut, they will tell you that there are still countless amounts of dead voters and duplicate voters and people that do not belong on the voter rolls. This needs to be fixed. And again, if I went out on the street right now, if I could take this microphone, I don't think the cord's long enough, but if I could go outside and just start grabbing people off the street, should we clean the voter rolls in Connecticut to make sure only actual voters get ballot applications and ballots? I bet you I'd have a tough time finding someone to say no. But in this room, I got a feeling we're going to find 25 people to say no. And that's a shame. That is a shame. This is something that should happen, just like all of the other amendments that I've offered and will heretofore offer. I move adoption, Madam President. I'd like a roll call vote.
Thank you, sir. We will have a roll call vote. Will you remark on the amendment, Senator Flexer?
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I would encourage my colleagues to reject this amendment. We have a lot of conversation in our committee about these issues, working with the Secretary of the State's office and the registrars of voters, and I think we are making good progress on making sure we update our voter rolls in a way that can give people confidence in the voter rolls for each individual town, but also ensures that people won't be disenfranchised because they're removed from the list. And I, again, would encourage my colleagues to reject Senate Amendment E. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark further on the amendment? If not, the machine is open. Mr. Clerk.
An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. Voting on Senate Amendment E, this is not the bill. This is Senate Amendment E for House Bill number 5001, an act concerning absentee voting for all and various other reforms related to the administration of elections. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate. We're not voting on the bill. This is Senate Amendment E of House Bill number 5001. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate.
Machine is locked. Mr. Clerk, give us the tally if you would, please.
Senate Amendment E of House Bill 5001. Total number voted 36, total voting yea 11, total voting nay 25, absent not voting 0.
Amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Unfortunate, again, predicted, not surprising, but disappointing. I mean, this is not a controversial policy. I'm not trying to argue the most fierce conflicts we have as political parties and our ideologies. I'm talking about cleaning the voter rolls, folks. Come on. I want to say very quickly that I have a lot of respect for the people that work in our town halls across Connecticut, registrars of voters, town clerks. I know a lot of them personally. A lot of them are emailing me and calling me regularly about some of these policies and expressing their concerns and wanting to make sure that those things that they deal with on a day in and day out basis are actually addressed in our laws. And I keep trying to bring those things forward to make sure that they are addressed. But watching these amendments go down one by one on party line votes is rather frustrating. Another thing that has been a concern of me and some of my Republican colleagues in recent years is that there doesn't seem to be any penalty for people that engage in crimes involving elections. You know, we've seen it reported, and by the way, the majority will have you believe that somehow there are no election crimes. That's a mystery. That doesn't really happen. And I used to argue about it in this chamber all the time, and thankfully, and I hate to say it in those terms, but the Bridgeport issue came to light. Terrible thing, shouldn't have happened, but that's what actually woke up the public to say, hey, you know what? There actually is election fraud going on. There are people that are trying to steal elections. That's a real thing. We should do something about that. But there are loads of other examples. One of my favorite is an article from the Waterbury Republican American. I think it happened in 2019 or 2020. And it's just page after page after page of every incident that's happened in the state regarding election fraud. I've got a whole stack of articles here. If we were doing a proper debate on this that wasn't limited by time, I would spend a long time getting into the meat of all of these individual crimes, how they occurred, why they occurred, and what we could do to prevent that from happening again. But suffice it to say, the number one thing we need to do if we want to prevent people from trying to interfere in our election process is we got to have penalties, folks. We got to actually do something. Got to actually find a way to discourage people from engaging in this behavior by creating a real penalty for them. So with that, Madam President, I hate to bother the clerk once again, but I have another amendment. This one is LCO 6007. I ask that this amendment be called and I be given leave of the chamber to summarize it.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 6007, Senate Amendment F.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Very straightforward amendment. It takes existing election crimes that we already have in statute, and this is a caucus amendment that's been offered by the Senate Republicans year after year, rejected on party lines in previous similar debates on early voting, on the creation of the ballot initiative to vote on early voting and absentee voting. We keep trying to create crimes for people that would break our trust and our faith in our electoral process. This amendment expands the penalties for a number of serious election-related crimes and fraud offenses to include mandatory imprisonment of 12 months. I think this is a good idea. I think we need to have a real deterrent. I hate to say it, that we might need to make an example of someone who has done an egregious amount of ballot fraud. I move adoption. I'd like a roll call vote.
Thank you. The question is on adoption. Will you remark, Senator Flexer?
Thank you, Madam President. I'm tempted to get into another conversation back and forth about felony offenses, but I'll just encourage my colleagues to reject this amendment. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark further? If not, the machine is open. Mr. Clerk.
An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're now voting on Senate Amendment F, House Bill number 5001. This is not the bill. We're voting on Senate Amendment F of House Bill number 5001. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate on Senate Amendment F, House Bill number 5001.
It really does. Thank you. The machine is locked. Mr. Clerk, kindly give us the tally, sir.
Senate Amendment F, House Bill 5001. Total number voting 36. Total voting yea 11. Total voting nay 25. Absent not voting 0.
Amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. In my haste, I omitted one of my amendments earlier that I intended on doing in a specific order, so I'm going to come back to it. And that is that we had a discussion about cleaning up the voter rolls and how important it was to make sure that the people that are on the list are accurate. And the main reason for that is that list is the source of information for anyone that would try and reach out to those voters, whether by phone to encourage them to vote a certain way, or to reach out to them by mail, or in the state of Connecticut, because it is allowed for anyone to reach out to them and, in fact, order a ballot application for them and have it sent to them. And because of that, what happens in Connecticut is you have the situation where political campaigns engage in this process in a big way. You'll have the Democratic candidate targeting their voters, the ones they think are going to turn out for them, and sending them ballot applications, more than likely ignoring people they do not think will support them. And of course, you have the Republicans doing the same thing. They'll be targeting voters that they believe are inclined to vote for their candidate, but they'll be ignoring people on the other side. And then, of course, you have other people that neither campaign has identified, and they'll just be ignored altogether, so they won't get the ballot application. This is a messed up process. You'll have multiple people receiving multiple ballot applications from multiple sources, from third parties, from candidates, from all kinds of entities, and then you will have some people not getting any. And the problem is that when our voter rolls are not accurate, you're also creating a situation where you're going to have multiple ballot applications sent to people that aren't even actual voters. What happens when all of that is floating around in the ether? Are we to assume that people that are sent ballot applications are not going to fill them out, maybe for their kids that are away from school, maybe innocently and honestly, not realizing they're not supposed to do that? Are we to expect that they're not going to fill them out for their elderly parents necessarily, even though that's a no-no as well? The fact is, these things are happening. They are creating problems. They are clouding the issue. Our elections are not accurate anymore. Elections that are decided by a handful of votes may or may not be the right person who wins and is seated in this chamber or the House or in some office from the town to Congress. It really needs to be fixed. There is a mechanism to fix it, and I think it's the most fair way to do it. And that is simply to eliminate the ability for third parties to send out ballot applications to voters. Period. Now, that doesn't eliminate people's eligibility from voting by absentee. That stays the same. I'm in favor of no excuse absentee voting, as is Section 1 only of this 73 section bill. But what I would require is that the individual voters actually ask for their ballot application. So you just say, I want to vote by absentee this year. And we can make it as easy as people want to do it. We can do it electronically. We can do it by phone. You can pick it up in the post office. You could do a number of things to be able to process your vote remotely via the mail, via absentee voting. But you should be the one initiating that and not some third party that is out there trying to generate as many documents and as many ballot applications to get them out in front of as many people as possible, whether they are real or imagined, whether they're legitimate voters or not. This problem has only gotten worse as we have expanded the ability for anyone to vote by absentee. Back in the day when you had to have a legitimate excuse, like you were sick or you were going to be out of state or you're in the military or something like that, it was not that much of a problem because no one was going to invest all of this effort in trying to target all those people and send them extra ballots and so forth. But now that everybody is potentially on the okay list, that has opened it up for campaigns and third parties and different types of advocacy organizations to start to get engaged in this process. I want to protect the right of people to vote in every way, shape, and form. The majority will have you believe that somehow putting more integrity and more security restrictions into our laws are somehow diminishing people's access to voting, and that could not be farther from the truth. What diminishes people's ability to have voting is whether that voting matters at all. If you're going to let people vote that shouldn't be voting, then how much value does your vote still have as a legitimate voter? That's the problem. We need to have a system that only allows people who legitimately are able to vote and only vote one time. That's what we need to have. Now, we can open it up as far and wide as you want to go. I don't care. That is fine. But we cannot open it up in a way that allows fraud or bad actors to occur. We cannot have this Bridgeport problem expand into other parts of the state. And I will tell you, it is happening elsewhere. Maybe not on the same level of magnitude, but the things that are going on there are going on in other places. There are people walking into nursing homes and getting people to fill out their paperwork and sign up to vote and so forth. And maybe those folks are not all prepared to determine actually who they're voting for. Maybe they don't care. It's just a matter of chasing down paperwork for some political campaigns. But those votes just matter just as much as the people that actually care and take the time to invest in the issues and understand who they're voting for and why it's so important. Your vote can be canceled out by a random harvested ballot from Bridgeport. It's a terrible thing, and we should end it. And one way we can do that is to prevent third parties from sending out unsolicited absentee ballot applications. Keep voting open, keep no excuse voting, but require that the voter is the one that asks for the ballot application. I move adoption of the amendment that is before us. Did I call this amendment? I did not. Get lost in my place sometimes.
Let us do it.
Madam President, the amendment is LCO 6002. I ask that the clerk please call this amendment, and I be given leave of the chamber to summarize.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 6002, Senate Amendment G.
Thank you, Senator Sampson. Please do summarize.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I forgive the faux pas. I've been up quite a few hours straight. It's hard to keep my thoughts clear and not distracted. This amendment, very straightforward, does as I just mentioned, would add language in the bill would basically say that no person, including any state or municipal official, shall mail applications for absentee ballots to any person unless such mailing includes, et cetera, et cetera. The whole situation here is that they should not be unsolicited. People should have access. They should initiate that process. I move adoption and I ask for a roll call vote.
Thank you. We will have a roll call vote, and the question is on adoption. Will you remark, Senator Flexer?
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I encourage my colleagues to reject this amendment. This is a subject that the committee has had good conversation on, and I hope we will have good conversation on this particular issue in the future. But as it stands in this debate, in this moment, with 9 hours left, 8, 9, well, I'll leave the math to somebody else. But I would encourage, again, my colleagues to reject the amendment. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark further on the amendment? If not, the machine is open. Mr. Clerk.
An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. Voting on Senate Amendment G, this is not the bill. This is House Bill number 5001. We are voting on the amendment. This is Senate Amendment G of House Bill number 5001. This is not the bill. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on Senate Amendment G. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate.
members voted. The machine is locked. Mr. Clerk, the tally, please.
Senate Amendment G of House Bill 5001. Total non voting 36, total voting yea 11, total voting nay 25. Absent not voting 0.
Amendment fails. Will you remark further, Senator Sampson?
Thank you very much, Madam President. Another 25-11 party line vote denying my efforts to improve the bill before us by providing more protections for the veracity and integrity of elections in our state. It's quite disappointing. So far, I've offered 7 amendments. The first one was about removing an overtly politically motivated section trying to inject partisan federal politics into our election law. And it's a frustration for me because one thing that I always say when we start talking about these election bills is that this is the rules of the game. You know, we can argue about the big topics. We can have debates about guns. We just did. I spent most of the morning arguing about our differences on the Second Amendment. We could debate abortion. We could debate a lot of social issues. We could debate a lot of things about the size and scope of government, the cost of things. But the one thing that we ought to try and keep within sight as bipartisan, as a priority, and that is our election law, because those are the rules of the game. That's how we decide who gets to be here to represent the people of our state and our country. It's so important. If we cannot agree on the rules of the game, if the majority wants to put forward policies which, in my view, benefit their party in elections over making good policy that we all agree on, that is disconcerting. That is a problem. That should change. I'm going to just offer one more amendment. It's a little bit different than the other amendments that were primarily focused on what's not in the bill as far as election integrity issues. This is something related to the bill, however, because the bill does bring up early voting in a sense that the section that prohibits federal and state law enforcement authorities from being within 250 feet of the polls is all about early voting. But early voting is an unbelievably contentious issue in this body as well. Not just absentee voting, but early voting as well. And that's because I think that the majority, frankly, messed up. When they did early voting, they made the time period for early voting way too long. It is now 14 days before Election Day. And they would argue, yeah, well, there's some states that were 21 and everything else. It's funny, though, because a lot of the states that started out with really long periods for early voting have been shrinking them little by little. And I've always had an issue with having a long period of early voting for a lot of reasons. The number one being that the election really is about a point in time, a snapshot in time about who's the best candidate for any particular office at any given time. And if you're voting way in advance of that time, something could change. You might discover something about one of the candidates after you've already put your vote in. Maybe something really significant happens. Maybe there's a war. And you're like, oh, I was going to vote for this guy, but maybe I should vote for this other person because of those circumstances. So early voting kind of skews what you're talking about. It also makes it very difficult for campaigns to be able to get their message out. And don't we want voters to be able to understand really where the candidates stand on the issues so that they can compare the candidates? Well, if you're voting before you ever even hear from one of the candidates because they haven't even reached out to you, you haven't seen any advertising, you haven't received any mail from them, that's a disservice to the process in my view. But I'm not against early voting. Since we first debated it in this building, I've said, yes, let's do early voting because it provides a level of convenience to voters. But it doesn't need to be 14 days. Why don't we just set it up so that we accommodate people's schedules? Not everybody's available on a Tuesday from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Maybe if we add a few other days, maybe a Saturday, that gets a few more people into the polls a little easier. So I've always advocated for some short period of time, whether it's 3 days or 5 days. Those are all fine with me. And right now, I'd be willing to accept almost anything less than 14 days, frankly. But as a result of this, Madam President, I'd like to offer an amendment. And that amendment is LCO 6026. I ask the clerk to please call this final amendment for me on this debate, and that I be given leave of the chamber to summarize it.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 6026, Senate Amendment H.
Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much. Madam President, I appreciate that. This is a very straightforward amendment. It's going to simply change the timing of our early voting. It's going to keep the same structure, which is that it's days leading up to Election Day, but not including the Sunday or Monday before the Tuesday. And it would change from the 14-day time period for general elections to 5 days for general elections. It would also require 3 days for primaries and 2 days for special elections. There are so many reasons to support this amendment, not the least of which is the fact that in most of these elections, and it does happen, we had significant turnout for early voting in the last presidential election, but most of it still happened within the last several days. But I will tell you that in primaries, we've had elections where almost nobody showed up at all. You have towns where you had the entire staff there at town hall ready to accommodate voters, and they get 2 votes in the whole day. You know, folks that are serving in our town halls to take care of this, a lot of them didn't sign up for this extra amount of work. And I don't believe they've been properly compensated for it either. Those are important things. Those are things that really ought to be addressed. For me, the simplest thing to do is to recognize that we gave the public 14 days of early voting, and they were like, well, we didn't really need 14 days. So give us a little bit shorter period of time. Let's make it a little easier on our town hall staff, and let's also make it so it doesn't cost the taxpayers so much to run these early elections. I have one final note about it, and that is that the whole idea of early voting is a bit disingenuous to me because the majority put this forward as if they were providing all this additional access to voters. But in the process, they didn't bother to properly fund it. So in a small town, say, that has only a couple of voting precincts, it's probably not a big deal. People will end up going to town hall. But in places like New Haven and Bridgeport that might have 20 or 30 polling locations, they did nothing to accommodate the fact that people normally vote at such and such a school. Nope. So those towns are having one precinct, one polling location, and that's it. So yes, you get a few extra days, but you're not getting the same level of access as you've had before. That should have been addressed. I would have rather seen shorter number of days and more polls open and accessible to people. And I'd also say that we ought to have some policy to address the long lines at the polling locations. If this debate was as long as I'd like it to be, if it covered as many topics as I'd like it to, we would be talking about that too, because that's something I've long advocated for, which is the idea that we should have something to protect people from going to wait in long, long lines and being discouraged about voting. It can be fixed. It just requires the will of this body to act and recognize that that is a real problem. That is a real problem that affects people in the inner city and may deter or suppress voting. But as long as I've been trying to get that done, the majority's been ignoring that also. But back to this amendment, it's a simple change. We're going to get rid of the 14 days, and we're going to do a more reasonable time frame that I think almost everybody recognizes as a necessity today. If you ask almost anyone in town halls across the state and voters themselves, they will agree 14 days was unnecessary, too costly, and too burdensome on local town governments and the people that are responsible for running those elections. So changing to 5 days makes a lot of sense. I move adoption, Madam President, and I'd like a roll call vote.
Thank you. We will have a roll call vote. Will you remark on the amendment, Senator Flexer?
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise in opposition to the amendment, and I'd like to make a few points about the amendment. First of all, the one point I do agree with the good ranking member of our committee on is that I do wish we had allocated more resources to our towns to support early voting. We've allocated some resources, but I do believe that our towns need more to be able to administer early voting, and frankly, the new process we're outlining here as well. Madam President, I would say that I think when we look at these measures, we need to put first and foremost in our thoughts the experience of the average voter. The average period of early voting in our country is more than 21 days. The existing law for early voting here in Connecticut with our 14-day period actually puts us at the bottom of the pack, if you will, in terms of the length of period early voting is accessible to people. And early voting, as we all know, is new for the state of Connecticut. And again, I think we need to emphasize the perspective of the average voter. This new process is in place. They've gotten used to in two elections, the 2024 election and the local election last year, of having this 2-week period. And if we adopt this amendment today, we're going to pull the rug out from under people, a process they just started to get familiar with and used to, and change it all over again. I think it's important that as we debate in this chamber, making it easier and more accessible for more eligible voters to participate in our elections, that we also keep the rules consistent and allow voters to have some familiarity with what the process is. I think it's very hard for those of us in this circle and in this building overall to remember what it's like to be an average voter, someone who doesn't eat, sleep, and breathe politics and elections. I believe the period we have right now of 14 days is the right period for our state. I know that it has been hard in some of our smaller towns to staff the process, but as long as we have the centralized town-by-town election system that we have, it's important that the rules be consistent across communities for those average voters first and foremost. So, Madam President, I urge my colleagues to reject this amendment. Early voting has expanded the franchise to more voters in our state. I think we're going to continue to see that this year and in the years to come, as will the provisions of the underlying bill. And I believe the more voters who are eligible to participate in our democracy and cast their ballots, the better the outcomes of our elections will be. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Will you remark further on the amendment? If not, the machine is open, Mr. Clerk.
An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on Senate Amendment H, House Bill number 5001, an act concerning absentee voting for all and various other reforms related to the administration of elections. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate. We're not voting on the bill. This is Senate Amendment H. We're voting on the amendment to House Bill number 5001. This is not the bill. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate.
voted. The machine is locked. Mr. Clerk, the tally, please, sir.
They must have heard him. Senate Amendment H of House Bill 5001. Total non voting 36, total voting yea 11, total voting nay 25, absent not voting 0.
Amendment fails. Will you remark further, Senator Sampson?
Thank you very much, Madam President. It's remarkable that some folks in this building refer to me as a heavy hitter because I'm 0 for 8. 8 amendments, 0 passed. All of them failing on a party line, 25-11. And just to take you guys down memory lane, the First Amendment was about eliminating the overtly politically charged, drag the controversy over ICE agents into Connecticut for no reason, just for politics. This is not happening in our streets. And if this type of drama does begin happening at our polls, it's going to be precisely because of that kind of thing. The fact that the majority is stoking the fire constantly of trying to create this controversy. I don't believe it exists, at least not in Connecticut. Photo ID, something that the people of Connecticut overwhelmingly support. All across the country, poll after poll after poll after poll, I've seen polls that are upwards of 90+%. I don't think you can get 90+% agreement on much of anything. Pink is a nice color, probably only about 60%. Photo ID is wildly popular and wildly effective at making sure that your election is accurate. It ought to be the law in Connecticut. It should not be rejected summarily on party lines year after year after year by the majority. The people of Connecticut want it. They should know how this vote went down today. They should know who voted for photo ID requirements for voting and who voted against them. We had an amendment to remove this, what I consider a Help Me Wanda amendment that was added to another bill that would allow for the permanent distribution of absentee ballot applications to people and have them already filled out. Talk about making it easier for people that would want to commit crimes, to commit ballot stuffing, to overload our drop boxes with fraudulent ballots. My amendment to create an anonymous voter verification system like they have in other states that do a lot of mail-in voting. Denied. Party lines. Auditing our voter rolls to make sure only people that are legitimate voters are actually eligible to vote and are on the voter rolls. Denied. Rejected. Party lines. Prohibiting the unsolicited mailing of absentee ballots. We talked about this at length. It's a little bit of a quirky issue. You got to kind of understand what's happening. But this is another thing that leads to a lot of unnecessary and confusing situations for voters who are even good people who are legitimately trying to do the right thing, but also opens the door for more fraud. Rejected. Mandatory minimum sentences for people that would commit election crimes. Can't we agree that we need a deterrent to stop people that want to defraud our elections? Can't we agree on that? No, we can't. Rejected. 25-11. Early voting. Again, if I went and grabbed people on the street, I don't know that I'd get 100%. But I'm quite confident I'd get a significant majority if they knew the facts about the cost to communities to hold these additional days of elections and whether or not it's really necessary to have 14 full days. Could we get by with less? Does it have to be 5? Not necessarily. Rejected. I really do respect my colleague, Senator Flexer, and what she does on the Elections Committee, but there are a few things that we just happen to disagree about. And one of those things is the way this process works. We work very well together on some things, yes. On the things that we agree on, that she likes, They happen no problem. The things that we disagree on, the things that I like, they never happen. And when I say they never happen, they don't get a hearing, they don't get a legitimate debate. Occasionally, one of those items might be offered as a hearing in a committee, even a debate out of the committee, but that's a token gesture. Doesn't mean it's ever actually going to be brought forward as legitimate policy. These items that we're describing today are items that are not just my opinion. These are things that are going on in other states, blue states and red states, that are actually improving the accuracy and integrity of their elections. And they are being disregarded in the state of Connecticut. I think the gentlelady said that, we shouldn't be making vast changes 9 hours before the end of the session. Well, we are. The bill that's before us is making vast changes 9 hours before the end of session. And the topics that I'm bringing up have been debated ad nauseum in this chamber and beyond. These are things that are happening in the public sphere. And if the argument is, well, we never had a proper hearing on that, Senator, well, that's because the majority didn't allow the hearing to happen. Not because I didn't try. So that's not really a fair characterization of what is going on. I lament the fact that we have only a short period of time to address this bill. There are so many other things in this bill. I barely touched a handful of the 73 sections that are in this bill. There are countless other things that are worth conversation about inside and outside envelopes. There are good things like allowing the AG to work on investigations with the SEC, the State Elections Enforcement Commission. A good thing. It's a shame that we didn't get to actually go through all of that. I tried to spend my time today covering the things that I think are important, which is making sure people understand how the world will change when this policy is enacted, and also what we're failing to do in partnership with this change. We're making a significant policy change. You would not give your teenage son or daughter the keys to the car without teaching them how to drive first. And I feel like this bill is a lot like that. We're going to open up the floodgates for this new type of policy without actually any guardrails or protections associated with it. And those are important guardrails and protections to make sure that our elections at the end of the day are honest and fair and that people trust them, as I said, like I did when I was a kid. When I was growing up, if you told me that there was election fraud, I would have laughed at you. Say, our elections are as tight and as well monitored and regulated as any in the entire world. Those are other countries that have crazy election problems where you can't trust the results. I'm embarrassed that my home state was made a national story because of the events out of the city of Bridgeport, not just once, but multiple times over several years. And to date, I can tell you nothing of any significance has been done to address that. My amendments today would have went a long way to repairing those problems. So ask yourself, who really cares about making sure that there's accuracy in elections, that there's true respect for the value of voters and their rights to cast a vote? Ask yourself who cares about protecting elections, who cares about stopping fraud. The votes that are on the board are quite clear. This is not just about whether we're going to expand absentee voting for all. That happens in Section 1 of the bill. There's 72 other sections. And there's at least 8 other missing sections, in my view. I cannot support this bill in its current form, Madam President, but not because I don't believe in expanding access to voting. I do. I believe in doing it the right way with respect for the people of Connecticut. Thank you.